Okay, let's talk about social identity theory. Now in this video, we're going to outline how you answer an SAQ on social identity theory, including Tajfel 1970, the theory itself, and how to get a top band 9 out of 9 SAQ. So let's get started with this first paragraph. As you probably already know, an SAQ is broken down into 3 key paragraphs. That is the theory, the case study, and the link. So let's break down the theory component. Now we want to start the first sentence with a brief outline of the theory itself. In this case, with social identity theory, we can argue that we don't have one personal self but several social selves. Now, as we continue the paragraph, we want to expand on the theory and the mechanisms of the theory. So, it's important that we include detail about what this means and bring in subject-specific terminology. You should note that not every part of this passage and this exemplar answer is critical to the mark scheme. Indeed, there are many different things that we can bring in, but we should indicate to the examiner that we understand the theory well enough to provide more detail on it. Hence, we follow up with the 2 next sentences according to the theory, and hence is why we categorize ourselves in terms of group membership. This is important because we link to the subtopic of categorization, and this is a key component in social identity theory. This also brings us to the next part of the paragraph. Now this is key, because in this paragraph we identify the mechanisms involved with the theory, and we bring in subject-specific terminology. In this case, what is critical to social identity theory is social categorization, social comparison, and the tendency for people to use group membership as a source of self-esteem. Now, while social comparison and self-esteem may be self-explanatory, social categorization, being a key piece of terminology in this passage and to the theory, is something that we should expand on further. Hence, it's important that we define this phrase for the examiner. Alongside the 3 components of this theory, the concept of in-group and out-group is key to Tajfel's argument. This is because it demonstrates what we are going to see in the results of his study. Hence, this is the final component that we want to bring in into our description of the theory, and leading us to the final subject-specific terminology, in-group favoritism. Now, it's important we hit all the criteria for this theory. Depending on the command term, you can decide how much detail you wish to add to this paragraph, but it's important that you fully outline the different components of this theory. This brings us to the second part of the SAQ, the study. In this case, I've decided to focus on Tajfel's 1970 study, but you may have chosen to decide something else. Regardless, it is important to note the different aspects of the study that you should include in your SAQ and how to break them down. So we start with the aim. Now, the key components I like to include when talking about a case study in an SAQ is the aim, the method or procedure, and the results. Now, if you can, it's great to try and memorize 2 to 3 examples of statistics of numbers that are used within the study. And focusing on 3 components helps you minimize all the memorization. So I want you to pause the video when each component of the study is being shown and read them through yourself. Starting with the aim, I think it's good to keep the aim to 1 to 2 sentences, short and simple. As we move on to the method, I usually like to include some aspect of the sample involved. Now, this should be especially the case if you're writing an ERQ, but for now we're focusing on the SAQ. Particularly within the method of Tajfel 1970, I think one tricky thing to focus on is the way in which the 2 scores were calculated. Now, you should at least indicate to the examiner that there were 2 different ways of measuring results. This is important because these 2 systems help us explain what we outlined in the first paragraph to do with the theory. Finally, we move on to the results. Now it's up to you to decide how much detail in which you want to explain the 2 different systems, but what you should include is the results for both. So now we move on to the link. Now you may find the link exceptionally tricky, and you might be wondering why it is that I've included it as a separate paragraph. And that is because it is crucial to getting a top band mark. Therefore, we want to separate it from the rest of the passage to signpost to the examiner that we have achieved this criteria of the SAQ. While you may think that the results explain the theory, in this paragraph we have to explicitly link the results with the part of the theory that we were arguing in the first paragraph. With the first sentence, therefore Tajfel outlines social identity theory and the natural tendency of members of a group to favour their in-group, we reiterate to the examiner that we understand how the study links to the theory. And in the rest of the paragraph, we reinforce this message, noting which part of the study, which results, indicate which part of the theory that we outlined in our first paragraph. Hence, we've reinforced the link and signpost to the examiner that not only do we understand how the study demonstrates the theory, but explicitly showing the examiner how this is done. And as you can see, that should sum up the SAQ for social identity theory, and it should look something like this.